This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash, episode 530 for October 22nd of 2020. Tech is transforming auto, and so is COVID. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Hey, Gary.
John, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. You too,
Good.
I hope.
Indeed. So we continue on.
Always, man. We got to do the show. You know it. People are asking for it.
Well, and I'm glad we can deliver it to them. So, what happened 75 years ago today?
Oh my gosh, 75 years ago.
This is impossible. I'll just tell you.
Okay.
So it's interesting.
Came up. I know that.
So 75 years ago today, Lincoln Mercury Division was established. And so I started looking into this. And so, Lincoln itself started in 1922 and Mercury started in 1938. So then 75 years ago today, they put them together. Okay. And then it lasted until they got rid of Mercury in 2011. And what I thought was rather interesting is, I didn't know this, you probably knew this, but there used to be Continental Division.
No, I did not know that.
So Continental Division lasted for 2 years. And basically what it was for the 1956 and 1957 model year of the Continental Mark II. And then they just put that into Lincoln. And so there you have it. But I thought it was more interesting, the other stuff, rather than, it happening today, 75 years ago.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. I never knew that Continental was its own separate brand.
It was higher than Lincoln.
Yeah. Well, that Mark II, that was a pretty expensive car too. So I could see how they may have wanted to create a separate brand image for it. But I'm sure the dealers said, we need volume.
Yeah, absolutely correct.
Good deal. Hey, we got to let everybody know Doron Levin is joining us today from Seeking Alpha and SiriusXM Radio. Hello out there, Doron.
Hey, hello there. And I want to say something about Continental Division. I believe that was the division that was put under the authority of William Clay Ford. And I believe he ran the Continental Division. And after that was shut down, I think that was a big disappointment to him. So he decided to start he'd take over complete ownership of the Detroit Lions. So
how'd that work out?
Not very well, as we all know, for over half a century.
Exactly.
It only didn't work out well if you like football. Otherwise, it's fine.
Yeah. Hey, let's bring in our special guest for today, Paul Eichenberg, back by popular demand. Paul, hello out there.
All right. Well, thank you for welcoming me back. So it's good to be here with you today.
Look, we love having you on the show because not only do you have really good insights and strong opinions about the industry, you back it up with facts.
All right.
And in fact, the last couple of times that you were on, I had to go back and rewatch the show and take notes.
Well, I'm glad you find value in it, and hopefully everybody else who's watching here today gets the same type of value out of it. So Thanks for having me here.
Okay, Paul. So the last time we had you on, it was just at the beginning of the COVID crisis. Mm-hmm. So now here we are months into this thing. What effects are you seeing on the auto industry as a consequence of it?
Yeah, I think there's been some big consequences. And, the first place I would start is, to be honest, I thought there was going to be much greater fallout with the companies. I think there was a tremendous fallout from a standpoint of personnel. I mean, there has been, just a tremendous amount of furloughs, tremendous amount of layoffs in the industry, and that has saved a number of organizations as they've downsized. But to a certain extent, in addition to that, what we've seen is just a tremendous resiliency of the strategy built around electrification. So, I mean, you've seen really since COVID hit, you saw the GM Investor Day around their battery day. CATL came out with some big announcements as far as where they're at, as far as their battery technology. And then we just had the Tesla Battery Day a few days ago. And we're continuing to see sort of these strong strides being made in the electrification. And what I would tell you from a strategy standpoint, the OEMs appear to be making the big bet in electrification. And then other areas like robotaxis, autonomous vehicles have slipped in timing as a result of, challenges, cost constraints, access to personnel, access to technology. So I think we've seen a lot of activity in the automotive industry around these big trends, and I look forward to getting into them with you in further details here over the course of the next hour.
Well, let me challenge you on the autonomous one then, Paul.
Yeah,
Just in the last week, Tesla has launched full self-driving in beta form. Waymo said, hey, we're back on the streets. We're delivering free ride, or not free rides, but autonomous rides, no safety driver. GM Cruise announced they're about to do the same thing. Ford showed us their 4th generation AV. And BYD in China said, hey, we got autonomous rides going around in Beijing. Sounds to me like 2020 is the year where AVs really hit the road.
So I would tell you, yes, there are a lot of big press being made, but let's just start with Tesla. Tesla is in a beta form, pending regulations. You look at Cruise. Cruise has had some delays. Argo's had some delays. Everybody's had some delays, and I think some of that is caused from the fact that again, the technology just is not, it's not yet ready for prime time. Let's say it that way. And part of the reason is because if you think about the safety requirements, there's been this push to get this ready for launch in wide scale. You see a number of the level 4 programs have been delayed, which has been cascading down through the supplier ranks. So what I think what you're seeing is the hype around the technology. The technology is very exciting, but as far as seeing the level 3, level 4 programs, that are really the core of the industry, we're seeing significant delays.
Hey, John, I would say that if you compare the two ideas, AV and electrification, that there is a much nearer and more significant financial risk for companies that are in the wrong spot with regard to electrification, given the government mandates that are unfolding in Europe and potentially in the United States. And I'd ask Paul to talk about the political risk, because it just seems to me that based on what might happen in the election, we could go off in one direction if Trump gets in, and another completely different direction if Biden gets in. And I think everybody knows that electrification one day or another is going to come here. They just don't know whether it's going to come here in 3 years, 10 years, 15 years, in a sort of thorough way. And I wonder what Paul thinks about the potential political risk of one candidate versus another candidate and how they will affect the companies.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very interesting question. And, we've done analysis that we've looked at a number of different scenarios. And the first thing that I would say is we see the difference between the Trump administration and the Obama administration we see the difference of about 3.5 million electric vehicles a year by 2030. And if you look at the plane that the
You said
Obama,
did you not say the Obama administration?
yes, I did say the Obama
Okay.
administration, because that's really the legislation as it exists today.
Okay.
The Trump administration
Okay.
has proposed changes, but if we use that as sort of a scale to look at what a Biden administration would look like, I mean, basically what we see is you see absolutely significant difference as far as the amount of electric vehicles that you would see here in North America, to the tune of about 3.5 million to 4 million out of, let's say, 16, 17 million. So it is significant as far as what the presidency would mean for this issue for the OEMs. And then if you take into account a Trump administration moving forward, and that they do put a freeze on emission standards, here's the big challenge for the OEMs is the investments that they're making. I mean, let's just look at GM. GM's made 3 big announcements here between, the locations that they're looking to build sort of these battery electric vehicles in for just North America. Here over the past, just the other day, they had another one. So I think there's going to be this, there's this issue that North America could really become a technology island as the rest of the globe aggressively moves towards vehicle electrification. And I think that is, it leaves a significant issue for the OEMs to start to have to deal with.
Wouldn't that be a lack of technology island?
Yeah. So, and I
Different
think
technology island.
if you think about it this way, what was it, 3-4 weeks ago, California comes out and says, hey, we're going to ban the internal combustion engine by 2035. These differences in legislation and these different scenarios make it really difficult for OEMs to plan. But at the same time, the whole value chain to start to be able to make these big bets. And I think what you're seeing from organizations like General Motors, for instance, is just saying, hey, we got a plan for an all electric future. This is how we see the technology winning despite legislation. And this is what we've got to be making our big bets on.
Well, it seems to me that General Motors has the option to slow down its investments, or companies can always slow them. Mm-hmm. They have revenue coming in from their main revenue machine is the full-size pickup truck. Mm-hmm. That's not going away anytime soon. So they're in a position to basically say, okay, we're committed to the full electric future, and I don't disbelieve them. But if the landscape were to change, let's say Trump wins. Let's say Trump goes after the waiver in California. Let's say he's successful in a Supreme Court in knocking down the waiver in California. That could make everything look a lot different for electric cars in this country, could it not?
It could, from a regulation standpoint. But you also got to remember, one of the big drivers for electrification in cars is these changing OEM business models and robo-taxis and, autonomy. I mean, if you think about it, it's 10 kilowatt hour, or about 10 kilowatt hours to be able to run these, autonomous driving systems. So as you start to look at this, these are the drivers for electrification beyond just regulation.
Sure.
And I guess, Doron, as I was talking earlier, if you look at the demand between what may be a Biden administration and a Trump administration, that's all driven from compliance, and compliance based on where we see the laws as they're being proposed. But at the same time, if we go back to the GM Investor Day, one of the things that just is a staggering statistic for me is GM has 555 engine and transmission configurations globally. When they go to an all EV, future, they go down to 19 platforms. Just think of the complexity reduction for an OEM like General Motors. Just think of, the scale that they get from their supply base. Just think of, product planning and scheduling and all these things that are just so streamlined in that type of future. And I think, there's a number of factors that are driving the OEMs to make these big bets. And, and again, it's this.
Well, if you remember, I prefaced this by saying, I think everybody knows an electric future is coming.
Yeah.
We just don't know how quick it's coming.
Right.
All right, Paul, but Paul, let me ask you something. Is there like almost a technological imperative that this is going to happen? As we look at what's going on in China, as we look at what's going on in Europe, I mean, they're going full on to electrify things. Okay.
Right.
And again, we're looking at global automotive companies, and they have to invest around the world. They have to make product around the world. Right. And so to your point of reducing complexity, orders of magnitude, is this, we keep using the phrase as a bet. I mean, right. If something's inevitable, it's not a bet. I mean, it's just like, okay, you got to pay the piper. I mean, there it is.
Well, and
do
again,
you see that happening?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And again, I would say the data that I have for that is the Tesla battery day, they're talking about a $57 kilowatt hour rate. I mean, if you think about this, 3 years ago, when we started to do research around this, we did a global study at which, 50, 60 experts believed we wouldn't get to $100 by 2030. Okay. So you know what? GM comes out and says, not at a 300-mile range, but a 400-mile range, I can get below $100. Okay. And the intelligence I have is that they can get significantly below that. Then you have CATL come out and say, well, we can get to $65. And now you have Tesla come out and say, well, we can get to $57 per kilowatt hour. And the thing is that 57, 65, whatever one of these numbers you use, it costs less to make a electric vehicle with a 300-mile range than it does an internal combustion engine. And this is why, and again, what's the data that you read? It was just a week ago. The CFO from Daimler came out and said, hey, we're preparing for significant restructuring of our powertrain operations next year. There's going to be huge social costs associated with this as we downsize because we're no longer developing internal combustion engines. So Gary, I guess you've articulated it well. It's no longer a big bet. It's in essence what's happening within our industry. And this is what the car companies are really pushing towards. And what surprises me is, again, you look at General Motors. I mean, basically, it's EVs. They're not really even focused on plug-in hybrids. They're looking to duplicate that Tesla model. There's others that are, what is it going to be? And I think this is the interesting time that we're at, is the structural cost for the OEMs to shift from the internal combustion engine to an EV is so significant, but the iterations, for a full hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, some of them are just saying, we can't afford to do that. We've got to win this game today. We've got to go all in on EVs. And I think, here in North America, the most aggressive with that is General Motors. The others are lagging, and they don't have the clarity and the strategy that you see coming out of General Motors.
So what do you make of Toyota? Toyota has a lot invested in hybrids. And I wonder if the California mandate, in which they say they're going to outlaw gasoline, would apply to a gas electric hybrid. And Toyota is known for being conservative, for being deliberate, but being very smart. And they've got a lot of money and yet they might be seen to be going somewhat slower here. What do you make of their strategy?
Well, I would tell you it was about 2 years ago where, through a number of investor presentations, and this is where we came by the intelligence, is the CEO of Toyota at the time said, hey, mea culpa, we got this whole electrification thing wrong, especially from what we see is happening in China and other parts of the world. And basically what he did is he assigned himself to be in charge of the electrification efforts for Toyota. And that was 2 years ago. Now, I think, as you recognize, they had been making a couple big bets, which was on the idea of the hybrid and the plug-in hybrid, because they had established such a successful track record with that. And then they also made a big bet in hydrogen, okay? So as you start to see 2 years ago what they've done, now they haven't abandoned both of those, but they've aggressively invested in full BEVs in a manner that they have to be competitive with the rest of the players. And and I think
that's more pressing for them in China right now than it is
exactly.
in the United States.
But think about this. I mean, also, and this is a big driver for organizations like Toyota, General Motors, Tesla, Hyundai, you can put in this category. And that is the idea that urban mobility changes and robo-taxis will be a huge change in the automotive industry. And as a result, you have OEMs like Toyota who see, hey, we've got to be investing in this idea of this is what urban mobility could be, which is driven more and more and more out of an electrical vehicle architecture. So, for me, there's so many factors, and this is what makes this such an exciting time, because there's so many factors that are playing here. And, organizations like Toyota, are not giving up on the idea that they could be a strong player in that robotaxi urban market. And I think that is another driving factor for what you're seeing coming out of the Toyota organization.
Okay, everybody sit tight 1 second there, Gary. We got to take a
Yeah.
quick commercial break. We're going to give a shout out to our friends at BorgWarner. Then we're going to come back and talk more about this stuff.
All right,
The
thank
world
you.
is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what BorgWarner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back talking all things automotive. And Paul, I got a question for you. Earlier in the show, you said that the United States is in danger of becoming a technology island, or as Gary put it, a non-technology island. I'm wondering if it's already happened. When I look at especially the big European suppliers, they're not investing a dime in electrification in the United States. It's either in Europe or it's in China. We see Tesla in the U.S. We see General Motors, as you pointed out, in the U.S. I mean, actually making cells and batteries. We've got some startups, but is it too late for the U.S. auto industry to catch up to where Europe and China are?
That is a great question. And, we see it in the work that we do with suppliers all the time. If you're a European-based, supplier, you've got this figured out. You know how you're investing in electrification. And we are a lagger here in North America. And so I think a lot of what you're talking about is absolutely playing out. And I think some of it is, if we look at, just what's happened here over the past 30 years when it comes to the electronics industry. The electronics industry, in essence, has moved to Asia. That's where all the big consumer electronics companies are. That's where all the industrial electronics organizations are. And when you start thinking about the fact that General Motors is going to have 19 variations of an electric vehicle platform. I mean, basically, it all comes down to industrial scale when it comes down to these electronics. And frankly, with the exception of really Northvolt and Quantum Space, the majority of the lithium-ion battery technology is coming out of Asia. We do have Tesla, who's made some significant strides. They've got, of course, the first JV they had with Panasonic. They're working with CATL. They're working to develop their own chemistries for certain applications. But besides this, we are not a technology hub, whether it's for the lithium-ion batteries, for the power electronics that go into these vehicles, with one exception. And I guess as I think through this, the one exception that we can say is definitely been driven out of the North American market is the whole Tesla skateboard concept. I mean, you've seen that. It's been adopted by, Tesla, Rivian. Basically, every startup recognizes that this is how you build these dedicated platforms. But really, that technology, as far as the core systems, has been developed and is focused somewhere else.
Does this go back to what Doron was saying earlier, though, that if we look at what the Detroit 3, as it were, makes money on, it's big trucks, right? And if you look at other parts of the world, Europe, high regulations, right? China, regulations, Japan, the infrastructure just can't support big vehicles, and they've always been making small, more fuel-efficient vehicles. So the people in Detroit have basically said, why not keep doing what we're doing? We're making a lot of money here.
Right. Well, and the other thing, and this is what very few people really recognize when you start to dissect the automotive industry. And let's just say, for argument's sake, we're producing about 90 million vehicles globally. One of the things that we share with people that is just a staggering statistic is there's only about 9 million of that 90 million that are designed and developed here in North America. And that's trucks and SUVs. I mean, basically all the car development platforms have moved from North America to Europe and Asia because they get the compactness, they get the different driving conditions. And basically, my Audi wasn't designed here, but what was my wife's SUV. So the point is that as we walk through this, and you start to see the focus of development that's taken place in North America is around these type of issues. And we find all the time that suppliers get blindsided by trends that come from vehicles, small vehicles, that frankly, they just don't see them coming because they're not focused on development for vehicles or small vehicles. They're focused much more so on the SUVs and pickup trucks. And as a result, I think this is part of the challenge you have. And of course, we're not seeing electrification come from, the big trucks and the SUVs and cascade down. It's more cascading up from the smaller vehicles. And I think these type of issues do have an impact on what's happening here specifically.
But don't you think we're on the verge of seeing the change? I mean, GM showed off the GMC Hummer this week. We see all these electric pickup startups in the U.S. There's tremendous amount of activity on the commercial delivery side in terms of battery electrics. I wonder if in just a couple of years we're going to go, yowza, the traditional truck makers, the Detroit 2.5, as somebody referred to them the other day, could be right on top of the trend. And, hopefully their traditional customers will, transition into electric trucks as well.
Right. So, I do see that. And, if you look at the Badger and what General Motors is attempting to do with the Badger, I think what Ford and Rivian were originally going to do. I mean, I think the idea of an OEM like General Motors really driving a dedicated pickup truck platform, and then bringing variations in for people to build on that makes a lot of sense. And I think we're only going to continue to see that because, again, scale is going to be so critical to competitiveness in this market, especially this value market that you're going to have around pickup trucks. So yeah, I think you're going to continue to see the trend. But the fact of the matter is we work with suppliers, for instance. Some suppliers are like, they're only thinking about 20, 30, 40,000 units of that Badger. Why would I get excited about that? Because they're used to living on 800,000 units. This is that change that's taken place that for some organizations, it's just a business model that's really hard for them to get their heads around. And I think this has disadvantaged them. Yeah.
Hey, Paul, we touched briefly on hydrogen before, and I'm been around long enough so that I've been to enough press conferences way back when GM would talk about hydrogen, and they don't talk much about it anymore. But I pay attention to it because of Toyota, and because Toyota thinks that this is an ultimate solution. And we see you referenced the Badger and Nikola and some of these companies that are interested in fuel cell trucks. And I just wonder how soon we might see a much more commercial application of hydrogen take place.
Well, I think especially in these Class 8 trucks, there's a very good chance that will take place. And I think if you look at what Toyota's been doing over the past 3-4 years, they've continued to push this idea that hydrogen is an alternative for these Class 8 long-haul trucks. And I think if you step back, and you look at what Nikola's done with a dedicated EV platform with a partner like Bosch, who's helped them develop that, technology, and then ultimately a GM deal that could bring GM hydrogen technology to that. Now what you have is buyers and fleets that have options based on, ultimately how do they see, their drive cycles, and ultimately what's going to be the best alternative for them to use. And I think you're going to see, hydrogen is going to find a place specifically in those type of long haul applications because it does offer advantages over electrification. So yeah, I think you're going to see that, and you're going to see that from organizations like Toyota. General Motors has invested a lot in development, and that's why I think ultimately a Nikola GM deal gets done because it gives GM an outlet for that technology. It gives them access to, probably 30, 40,000 units for the Badger. There's just a lot of merits to GM and Nikola tying up in some form or fashion.
What about in light vehicles, hydrogen in light vehicles and fuel cells?
Yeah, now this is something I would tell you. We probably do 150, 200 expert interviews with the OEMs over the course of the year, around electrification. And whenever we ask the question around hydrogen for passenger car, I think if you look out in the next 10 years, you may see 10, 11, 12,000 units. But it is just, it just has some challenges that I think, electrification is just going to be a simpler way to deliver. They, of course, use basically the same type of power electronics and everything. It's just the sort of the fuel source. But I think from everything that we've seen and all the work that we've done is just there's not a demand, there's not an interest at the OEM level from a light vehicle standpoint that's really pushing this technology.
Except maybe in South Korea and Japan, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. And even it was interesting. I was talking to somebody. We were in China a couple years ago, meeting with all the local OEMs to get an understanding of what their plans were for electrification over the course of the next several years. And basically, what we were told in a couple of those is the interior minister, who's in charge of all of this within China, is basically their transportation minister. He did research for his PhD in hydrogen, and was looking at that as, would that be an alternative for us? And I think over the past couple of years, even they've abandoned that because of just the logistics, but also the access that they have in China to just rich deposits, and the reserves that they're building around lithium and other critical materials that go into these batteries. I think what they have is a real solid national policy that says, here's where we think we win long term, and it's much more focused on EVs today than ever before.
Paul, I want to go back to, John was mentioning the plethora of pickups that will be coming out. And today, Auto Week ran a list of those that are going to be coming out in the next couple of years. So you have the F-150, the Rivian R1T, the Lordstown Endurance, the Nikola Badger, the Cybertruck, the Bollinger B2, and Chevy will have a pickup truck by late 21. So my question to you is, do you see this as being vehicles that are going to be bought in the sorts of volumes that these vehicles traditionally are purchased in, or will this basically be a niche or almost a novelty compared to the numbers of a F-150 in a given year?
Yeah, I think for a while it's going to be a novelty. These are going to be niche applications, and I think what you're going to see is a trend is people get familiar with the technology. One of the things that we saw, and I'm going to refer to the Tesla battery day, that I think is the potential to change this, is if you look at the Cybertruck and what they're doing for semi trucks, they're developing a whole different chemistry for those vehicles. So actually what Tesla is looking at is 3 different chemistries for 3 different vehicle segments. They'd have a chemistry that is basically their low-cost $25,000 city commuter vehicle. They have a performance car, alternative for like the S. And then what they have is they have a new chemistry for trucks. And I think what you're going to see is the technology start to be adopted, with these different OEMs looking at the technology and just testing the market. But then I think what you're going to see is you're going to start to see that type of development focus to say, hey, how do we improve the performance? How do we, how do we make this so that these people who really, use this for utility, but maybe only are driving 40 miles a day, how do we give them more power? How do we give them more that's going to give them the comfort that says, hey, this is great because when I'm at the work site, I no longer bring a generator. I just plug into my, my pickup truck. These type of things will start to develop, but it's definitely going to start as a niche, but it has the potential to go from there.
Hey, I'm going to jump in right here. Let's take another quick commercial break. I know, Gary, you got a lot of topics for us to get into, but for right now, a shout out to our good friends at Bridgestone. All right, we're back. Take it away, Mr. Vasilash.
Well, I think the big news, and it surprises me that it really didn't come up in this conversation that we've had thus far, is the introduction of the Hummer EV, officially introduced. And I mean, does it surprise any of you how much they're planning on charging for the first vehicle?
I'll say no. I'll jump in first with this, only because I just happened to test drive a Cadillac Escalade out right now at $113,000. And it didn't even have Super Cruise, which is another $2,500 on top of that. So an all-electric GMC Hummer for roughly the same price doesn't surprise me in the least.
I think psychologically, when you start getting into six-digit numbers, you sort of think of them as more than a five-digit number that's almost there. The power of compounding over the course of all of our careers has really launched the prices of things into the stratosphere, and the marketing of a vehicle like that is obvious as a luxury vehicle is obviously going to be one in which the top tier Hummer, they're going to test the water with that. They're going to see what kind of demand there is, and if there's lots of demand for it, they'll make more of them, and if there's not that much demand for it, they'll make a version that's less costly. So I think none of that surprises me too much.
Well, remember, they already announced cheaper versions.
Right.
There's an 80,000, a 90,000, or I guess 70, 80, 90,000, right? Or is it 80, 90, 100?
I thought it was 80. I thought it was 80.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are going to be quote unquote cheaper versions.
Economical ones.
Well, the question I would ask when you start looking at these electric vehicles and then you start to see what's happened with the Tesla S, I mean, how long are people going to start owning these vehicles? And, this may be not, the typical buyer who looks at it as, I'm going to own this car for 4 or 5 years. People may be making, because of just the nature of the vehicle, they may be making a longer term investment.
Yeah, but, in that class of vehicle, in the luxury segment, 80% plus are leased. Those people are in the vehicles for 3 years max, and boom, they're out into the latest, hottest thing. So I don't think you look at this as how long am I going to be in. They just look like I'm going to do a 3-year lease and get to whatever's new when it's up.
So Doron, I want to ask you this question. So we look at the Hummer EV and, and they're boasting, that's got 1,000 horsepower. What does this do to General Motors' environmental image?
I have to be a little bit cynical about this altogether, because I think much of an environmental image is adopted to sort of keep yourself out of the way of government regulators more than anything else in terms of its. I think General Motors wants to do the right thing for the environment, but again, you're talking. I believe you're looking at a very small volume vehicle, and it's very much a test vehicle. Hummer was out there. If there are a lot of people who like this, if there's a strong economy, people who already own 3 or 4 or 5 vehicles want to add this to their fleet. It's not that much different than buying a top-end Range Rover or a top-end Rolls-Royce SUV or Bentley SUV. I think there's a market for this, but smaller. I think that electric technology, battery technology, cascades its way down through the fleet, through learnings, through adaptations, through versions. And what happens is, I think that you're talking ultimately about less propagation of CO2. Now, the debate over CO2 and its role in global warming, nobody disputes that it has some role in global warming, is still very much a debate in scientific circles. No matter what the politicians will tell you about, 97% of scientists say that it's this or that or the other. I think in the minds of the population at large, it's still somewhat of a question. So I think today, if you're a big company, you have to go along with sort of the conventional wisdom on this, and General Motors is going along with the conventional wisdom on this. This is going to be this is going to be portrayed as a vehicle it's an emissions-free vehicle.
Right, but let me ask this a different way. What if General Motors had, instead of the Hummer, had come out with a vehicle that would blow the doors off a Tesla Model 3? That would have been a sensational vehicle that we could all buy. Wouldn't that have made a better statement for the corporation? Anybody can answer this, not just Doron, because he's going on and on about CO2.
I think they tried that with the Chevy Bolt.
No. That was not something that was going to blow the doors off of anything.
Well, look, you can't just come out with a vehicle that blows the doors off the Tesla Model 3. You know, look at the Hummer, 1,000 horsepower. To me, the bigger number is the torque, 11,500 foot-pounds of torque. I mean, you can't do that with a piston engine car. But what I'm getting at is, how do you top that? I mean, you can only push so much horsepower through a street-legal car with street tires. And I would argue we're bumping up against the max of what you can do. So what else can GM do? Over-the-air updates, Tesla's already beat them to that. You know, direct sales, Tesla's already beat them. You know, so how do you beat Tesla? From a product standpoint, I would argue we're up against the limits of physics of what you can do with an electric car. Maybe you can take cost out, but now I think you got to turn to other kinds of digital services or other things that you can offer customers that maybe a GM can leverage its dealership body with, something else. But if you're going to try to beat Tesla at its own game, rot's a ruck, boys. I don't think you can do it. You got to do something different.
So it's a marketing ploy.
Yeah, probably.
Well, I don't think Tesla generates the volume that makes General Motors want to beat them on a volume basis. I mean, yeah, I think from a branding standpoint, from a standpoint,
you're breaking up. I don't know if your microphone's banging against your collar or something.
It's some kind of interference. I'm not sure what it is. It's some kind of interference, but it sort of goes in and out. I'm not sure that they sit. I'm sure that Tesla is definitely under the skin of General Motors executives. I don't think there's any question about that. But in terms of the pure numbers that they generate, I don't think that they need to beat anything off. You know, they need to create anything that will blow the doors off of Tesla. I agree with what John said.
All right, Paul, you have to chime in.
Yeah, well, I guess the point, I go back to, and it was about a year ago that Tesla started selling insurance in California. You know, and again, I think, I've shared this before on the show. When you look at that, what does Tesla know about their buyers? So much more than any insurance company will. And they also know that as they increase the amount of autonomy, the likelihood that you're involved in an accident is 6 times less, you know, when you're just using their autopilot feature. So as a result, what you're starting to see is this, the digitalization of these services. Tesla is disrupting the automaker model. They're disrupting the insurance model. They're disrupting so many different models because people are such willing participants to drive their vehicle, park it at night, and have a high-speed router download all of their information to Tesla. That's the breakthrough in the Tesla model. It's even the breakthrough in their autonomous driving. Nobody else can do autonomous driving like Tesla because everybody has become a willing participant to teach Tesla, how to do autonomous driving. Nobody else can do it that way. So the fact of the matter is I think that if you look at a General Motors, who I think has been very disciplined, very aggressive to say that is the future of our automaker model. We're going to use our scale. We're going to use our customer base, and we're going to leverage that opportunity. And I think that's what they're very, very disciplined and focused on, because we see it in their software strategy. We see it in their BEV strategy. We see it throughout the organization as far as what's critical to that, to General Motors to be doing in-house versus what are they willing to pass on to others in their value chain. So that's my view.
So Paul, let me follow up on that a little bit. Okay, so you've talked a few times during the show so far about the notion of autonomous electric robo-taxis. Mm-hmm. That will take X number of vehicles out of the mix. Yeah. Correct? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then, you have the issue of, as you were saying, that, there's going to be a change in terms of propulsion systems, whether it's just battery electric or going to full hydrogen. You've also said that there are a whole bunch of suppliers out there who are saying, gee whiz, we're used to, supplying 700,000 unit vehicles a year. What is going to happen to the supply base in the US if these things come to fruition with the next 10 years?
Well, I think, just a point I'd make is Morgan Stanley on Monday came out with a reforecast of their electrification model. So they have, basically as they grade, the top tier suppliers, they've built a model to shift from the ICE to these high levels of electrification. This report came out on Monday. And basically, we had always been in line with their forecast around our compliance-based model that 1 out of 4 vehicles globally by 2025 will be electrified. They have started to increase that. So they've gone from 26% to 31% globally by 2030. But at the same time, they went from about 15% to 25% in North America. And, again, this is just another reference point that I share with you. But when I was at Magna, I would say 90% of the M&A opportunities that we were presented were, companies from the Great Lakes region that were $100, $200 million machining companies that were forging, were die casting, we're making injection molded components to go under the hood. And frankly, this is where you're going to see the big fallout of this. I mean, I think I've shared with you what we've seen in forgings, about a 90% reduction in the amount of forgings. You see about a 75% decrease in the amount of castings. You even see about a 30% decline in the amount of plastic, components that are used under the hood. And frankly, this whole thing that the OEMs are going through to change their model is something that, to be honest, there's not something new for these organizations to do. And for me, if you just step back and you look at this on a global basis, you have a $400 billion powertrain supplier market that is going to decrease to $300 billion over the course of the next decade. And we calculate between tier 1s and tier 2 suppliers in that space, it's about 9,600 suppliers globally that are going to be impacted by this decline. And the question is, and this is where I think here in North America, we are significantly behind in the supply base, because very aggressively in China, very aggressively in Japan and Korea, and in Europe, those suppliers are reinventing themselves. They're transforming their business models. They're looking at alternative ways to invest in their business. And this, for me, is the big fallout that just really nobody ever really discussed in a meaningful manner as far as what this means to the North American automotive industry, but then also the Great Lakes region, because the Great Lakes region is made up with many, many of these types of organizations. And there's one other thing I'd like to mention, and I think Doron was talking about this earlier, or we were talking about this when we were talking about the technology islands. If you look at, for instance, where does engine performance and where does that technology stem from? It's right here in the Great Lakes regions. When you look at transmission and transmission technologies, you've got pockets here, and you've got pockets in Central Europe between Austria and Germany. Okay, some of the best gear cutters in the world are based there. But they're far more focused in what does a new electronic future look like than here. And when you step back and you start to look, again, as we mentioned earlier, the scale for this comes out of Asia. Just think, who's GM's partner on lithium-ion batteries? It's LG. Who are the 2 biggest lithium-ion battery manufacturers? It's CATL, a Chinese company that just was founded 9 years ago, and it's LG. And then following behind them quickly are Korean, Panasonic, different types of organizations that are all based in the other parts of the globe. And as we talked about the idea of these vehicles in the development of the smaller vehicles, they're all being developed in other parts of the globe. So for me, this is the challenge that we have as a North American industry. How do we catch up to the rest of the world in where the technology is very quickly moving?
Paul, I think it could even be more dire than what you're portraying there. Electrification is where the world's going, right? We all know that it's going to go there.
Yes.
Electrification definitely impacts anybody who's involved in internal combustion engine technology. It's, as I keep saying, it's not dead, but it's a dead end. But you brought up the issue of robo-taxis, autonomous electric vehicles that are shuttling people all around. I've talked to people at Uber and Zipcar, and they tell me one shared vehicle in a dense urban area replaces the need for 15 other cars. Mm-hmm. But so there's going to be a huge impact if and when robo-taxis truly become cheaper than owning a car and are totally reliable and very convenient. But what I'm really getting at is who's going to provide that? And I'd love to get your insights on this. Are traditional automakers going to transform themselves into retailers of mobility? Or is that going to go to other startups or other companies that are already in the mobility business? And so you're talking about suppliers being threatened by the move to electrification. I think robotaxis threatens all OEMs everywhere in the world, not just North America.
Right. So I would tell you from our expert interviews, because we've started over the past 18 months to do a significant amount of work for suppliers around the idea of robotaxis. And some of it is because what our suppliers always used to, they're used to getting a forecast to say, oh, you know what, that GM vehicle is going to produce 350,000 units, and I can bet on that. The problem is when you have a disruption like robotaxis and the OEMs saying, well, we think it could be 50,000, it could be 5,000, or could it be 500,000? It's anybody's guess. So how do you start to plan for that? So we have started to do a significant amount of work around looking at the robotaxi model for the OEMs. What I would tell you is, first of all, there are several OEMs who believe that this is where the great shakeout starts to take place, okay? Because not everybody can afford to invest in robotaxis. The second thing that we've started to see are 3 distinct models that are emerging from the OEMs today. And the 3 distinct models are really being driven around the idea of how can they participate. And frankly, I believe what's driving everybody is the idea of the Tesla network. Okay, so the idea that, instead of parking your Tesla in a garage, you just turn on the light and it starts driving around, taking people around an urban environment. This is a vision for the future. But what I would tell you is the OEMs that really buy into this is the urban future, it's organizations like GM. They've acquired Cruise. You look at Ford, VW with Argo. You look at Tesla, you look at Toyota, you look at Hyundai. These are the ones that see and are making investment decisions, strategic decisions around that vision and that model. The next category, which I would refer to, is the Boeing model. These are the OEMs that are going to make for Waymo. Waymo, you tell us what you want, you spec the vehicle, but you are the face to the customer, that urban customer. And those are the organizations like PSA, FCA, Jaguar. You just see who's teaming up with Waymo and who's producing vehicles for them today. That's the second business model. The third business model is the premium OEM model. They're going to be focusing on suburban drivers. Ultimately Daimler, if you think about this, last year at the beginning of the year, Daimler and BMW formed a venture to make robo-taxis. what did they both realize? We don't have deep enough pockets to make the bets that we need to in electrification, autonomy, robotaxi, everything. So as soon as they, Daimler got a new CEO, they stopped all that robotaxi development. So here's the third model that we see. And ultimately, what we see is where everybody's focused and everybody's trying to get to is the idea of Waymo. So I pick up my phone. I've always got Waymo on my phone. They've mastered the customer experience. They're taking all my data. They're reselling it in ways I've never, ever dreamed they could. They've got a LiDAR system that's painted maps of the community that they're reselling so that I have an autonomous driving vehicle. They've done all of this to build just an excellent business model, but at the same time, they start to control the driver or the consumer experience. And that's ultimately where mobility as a service is going to. And you've all probably seen the studies that, this is $1 trillion market when you start to transition from just being an automaker to really looking at this idea of mobility as a service.
So Paul, let's break this down. So for your first type, this robotaxi type, this is where a car company, a General Motors, would run a service. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Then
the second one is basically the OEM becomes like a white goods manufacturer that
right.
it's labeled something else. It's
right.
Labeled Uber or Waymo
right.
or what have you.
When it comes to that model, when it comes to urban mobility, they'll sell vehicles in the suburbs, they'll sell them for rural, but when it comes to that idea of what urban mobility is, they're not going to be participating like the robotaxi companies.
And then in the third case, it's basically we're going to have Hummer EV priced vehicles, and people are going to be buying those because that's a luxury item.
Right. More of a premium item.
So what does this do to the total number of vehicles that, to go back to the 90 million that you said earlier? I mean, does that number shrink immensely as a result of this?
Well, and that I would tell you is the $500 million question. Because, to be honest, and again, we do a lot of this and we've done our own proprietary research. We've looked at a number of research sources. And for instance, if you go back to 2030 and you use an organization like IHS as a forecast, they'll tell you, well, based on what we talk to the OEMs, we see a demand of about 3 million units, okay, by 2030, a couple 100,000 by 2025. Okay, but if you look at other sources, let's say Frost and Sullivan, let's say, you name it, any type of third-party prognosticator, you'll see that go up to 12, 13, 14 million by 2030.
For robotaxis.
For robotaxis, yes. So that will, it will have an impact on production. Definitely, from a global standpoint, and this is the thing when you start to get into the whole robotaxi model, it's the idea that people are moving to urban centers. There's less space available in urban centers. People don't want to be owning vehicles in urban centers because it costs so much to park, and then you've got, the cost of ownership and you've got the cost of insurance and everything. Where, hey, I can hop in a Uber, or I can hop in a Waymo, and it's about $1 a mile. Okay, so if you're going 20 miles a day, and you work in a city center, and you've got 20 trips a year, by the convenience alone is one thing, but the cost to the consumer is just so much less. And and I think that's why, as John was talking about, as you step back and you think about this, the amount of the car park that could be reduced as a result of this, the real estate that could be freed up. I mean, how many times do you go downtown Detroit and just see these lots, for the auto show that, they don't have anything vertical going on. They're just parking cars. That's still valuable real estate. People will create value in those urban centers.
Paul, let me ask you a question, if you don't mind. I'd like to ask why it is that John Krafchick and many of the other people in charge of these autonomous vehicle programs in the last year to 18 months have been saying things like, well, I don't know if we'll ever see full autonomous in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Why are they saying stuff like that? And if they're saying stuff like that and they're being honest, then why are we even talking about robo-taxis?
Well, I think that's where, we sort of started the conversation, and that's where John came out and said, well, wait a minute, here's what Cruise has done. Here's what the autopilot, system from Tesla has done. But the issue is and if you think about this, vehicles and the OEMs, focus on safety is critical. And let's say today, for 98% of use cases, autonomous vehicles are there. The software has been developed for 98% of the use cases. But ultimately, it's that 2% of use cases that gets to be really, really tough. And, again, that's why I think what you're seeing is you're seeing some of the programs be delayed. You're seeing some of those people, like what you're talking about, are just saying, hey, this is a bigger challenge than what we thought. But do you see organizations like Tesla or Waymo giving up? No. I think what you will see is that there will be organizations that will abandon this because it's just going to be, it's a moonshot.
Yeah, but what we also have to do is define what we're talking about here. So if you ask a John Krafchick or anybody in the business, Brian Selesky and all the others that are in that, are we going to have autonomous cars anytime soon? They'll say no. But they're talking level 5, which by definition is you can get in it anytime, anywhere, and go anywhere you want.
Right.
I agree. That's not going to be in this decade, maybe not even in the next, although I think it will be. But if you want to talk geo-fenced area, bada boom, bada bing, it's solved.
Right.
So right now, Waymo is launching in Phoenix with a 50 square mile region that is going to go to, if I remember right, by the end of this year, 100 square miles. And remember, this is just in the bare infancy of it all. GM Cruise is going to launch in San Francisco. Very complicated driving environment, far more difficult than Phoenix. And what's Ford doing? It's launching in 5 different cities with their Gen 4 thing next year. So they're taking a different approach of trying to learn in a bunch of different driving environments. So my argument is autonomous vehicles are here right now. They're operating on streets of the United States. They're moving people and goods around with no driver, no safety driver in them whatsoever. So I would argue that it's here right now. Now, I'm talking level 4 geo-fenced. If you want to say that's not autonomous, I'll argue with you all day long, or anybody with it all day long. Fair
enough, but on a snow day, does that mean that Chicago and New York shuts down?
No, because if the road is covered with snow, if you're in a geo-fenced area, that vehicle knows exactly where it is. You as a human being might know, holy crap, where do I go? I can't see the road whatsoever. That autonomous vehicle, because of the 3D LiDAR maps and its sonar and its LiDAR and its video cameras, knows precisely where it's at.
So there's no shutdown at all in a geo-fenced area?
No. Well, I'm not going to say not ever. There could be some inclement climate thing that throws them askew. But I would argue right now they're probably better than any human being could deal in inclement weather, seeing through fog, seeing through night, in driving rain, in snow and ice. They have a much better situational awareness of where they are and what's going on around them than human beings do.
Oh, come on, John. I've driven with Doron. He knows all that. Just it's magnificent. All right. So we promised we were going to get Paul out of here at 4 because he's got a meeting at 5. So we need to wrap this thing up. So
yeah, I got a pedicure in 5 minutes.
All right. Good for you.
Well, Paul, thanks for coming back on. You always
Hey.
stimulate a lot of good discussion.
Yeah, really nice to meet you, Paul.
Yeah. Hey, Doron, nice meeting you too. And John and Gary, thank you for having me on. I enjoy these conversations for sure. So have a great rest of the year, everybody, and appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Paul. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Okay.
Doron, thanks for joining us, and we'll definitely get you back on too.
Doron, it's always one of my major pleasures to see you.
Always. Take care.
Okay, thanks everybody. We'll see you.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.